For eons, peace in this galaxy has been a polite fiction, a fragile illusion brokered by exhausted empires and the fear that someone somewhere might remember how to win. What if I told you that someone is us? That a forgotten human fleet, a relic from an ancient and brutal war, just reawakened in the dark between stars. This isn't history returning for a museum tour. This is a drumbeat. And when it reaches the heart worlds, the balance will shatter. The broadcast opened every screen from Luna to Lerdo Station. Commander Jonah Rios, border guard, didn't hear it live. He was 20 hours out past Neptune's Lagrange, where the Kuiper turned into an unlit cathedral and scanners usually read nothing but cold. Then his board screamed. A singular energy signature bloomed like dawn behind a mountain, too clean for fusion, too old for slip drives, too quiet for anything known. Rios throttled the Corvette Sutter's mill toward the source with the kind of curiosity Americans have always used to get in trouble. They found a mausoleum of ships arrayed around a hollow black tetrahedron the size of a city. Hulls were scarred and pitted, but their contours were poetry in steel. Angled armor, ribbed spines, cathedral prows. No registry matched, because no registry lived long enough to remember them. As Sutter's mill approached, a ribbon of blue-white script ignited along a derelict's flank. Rios sent a drone to translate. The drone died, neatly cut into vapor by a filament of light that hadn't existed a heartbeat earlier. Automated defense grid, said Tessa Morgan, civilian historian riding shotgun on a salvage permit. Someone left the porch light on. Rios hailed. The reply was mathematics, prime sequences, then a question encoded as ratios any school kid could parse. Do you claim descent? The words unfurled on Morgan's pad like a ghost speaking English through algebra. She looked at Rios, freckles stark in the console light. If this is what I think it is, she whispered, we didn't crawl out of the mud and stumble into the galaxy. We fell from it hard enough to forget. News of first contact, if contact was what you called not dying, raced faster than diplomats. On Meridian, the Triarchate convened an emergency session. On Hesper, the mercantile hegemony emptied vaults to fund covert salvage teams. The Choir Republic of Ilion issued a hymn asking for calm, which is what republics sing when they want time to build bigger guns. Earth's councils did not sing. They made coffee, pulled up every myth and classified scrap with the word relic in it, and asked their grandparents what stories their grandparents had been too frightened to tell. The second probe lasted longer, 2 minutes of exquisite mapping before the same hair-thin filament sketched a line through vacuum and erased it. It wasn't malice. It was muscle memory, a door checking a lock after centuries asleep. Then the tetrahedron pulsed. The derelicts lit in sequence like constellations remembering their names. Gravitic harmonics washed the Corvette's hull. Morgan steadied herself with a hand on the bulkhead and felt ridiculous, impossible, like the ship exhaled. Message repeating, the comms officer said, new clause appended, descent must be proven. How do you prove you're a people? Rios asked. Morgan swallowed. You answer the hard question. She keyed the reply pad and sent the only honest thing humanity has ever said at every frontier, from the Appalachians to the asteroid belt. We're still here. The tetrahedron spun once. Somewhere deep inside the mausoleum, a mechanism older than memory finished a thought it began before any of them were born. A hangar door groaned open, and for the first time in lifetimes, the human relic fleet drew breath. Across the galaxy, a million listeners stared at the same paused frame, the opening of a door in the dark, and felt history lean forward. They called it a fleet because the word was convenient. In truth, it was a cathedral complex of war, carriers with ribbed carapaces, knife-proud escorts, a battleship whose stern looked like a fallen city. Their bones were wrong in ways that made engineers sweat. Plate seams were beveled for kinetic ricochets no modern navy planned against. The drive vanes suggested a philosophy that treated inertia as a negotiation, not a law. And everywhere, inscriptions, not names but oaths. Morgan floated through the first open bay with a camera drone and a historian's awe. The walls displayed friezes in bas relief, scenes of worlds under siege, then lifted. Humans evacuating aliens, aliens standing ceremonial guard over human graves. Good wars are stories we tell ourselves on Memorial Day. Real wars are bargains you make with nightmares. These carvings did not boast. They recorded prices paid. In the control sanctum, they found a sphere of dark glass like a drop of night. Morgan raised a hand. Archivist, she said because she had read fragments that used the term once in a conspiracy forum moderated by retirees and one obsessive at JPL. The glass brightened. A voice filled the air with the tone of a patient teacher who also built guillotines when she had to. Acknowledged. Custodian Node 9 online. Query, lineage. Rios blinked. You want DNA? Not flesh, story. A harmonic thrummed through their suit speakers. Define human. Morgan could have recited 1,000 definitions. Tool-making primate political animal, the creature that names its dogs and then writes poems about the heartbreak of losing them. She did what Americans do when cornered by a test. She told a story. We came from a small world with a big sky, she began. We got good at making neighbors and enemies sometimes the same day. We learned to cross oceans of salt, then oceans of night. We argued about everything and built constitutions so our arguments wouldn't end the world. We failed that a few times. We're learning. She paused. We bury our dead with their boots on. The sphere was quiet a long time, sufficient for provisional recognition. Panels retracted. Power woke in the ship like sunlight under ice. Back on Earth, Morgan's feed exploded. The algorithms loved her steady voice and the way she didn't sound like a hostage to wonder. Conspiracy prophets shouted that the fleet would crown a human empire by Tuesday. Pessimists prophesied extinction by Wednesday. Markets did what markets do. They pretended to understand. Meanwhile, the wider galaxy reacted like a crowd that discovers there was a gun in the room the whole party. The Triarchate deployed research vessels, with cruisers hidden under tarpaulins of diplomatic language. Privateers scrambled. The hegemony offered Earth security partnerships that weighed like golden handcuffs. Choir ships sang louder, their hymns masked engine noise. Custodian Node 9 guided Morgan through the record, the echoes, a mnemonic tapestry stitched from fragments, tactical feeds, diary excerpts, battlefield speeches carved into bulkheads when there was no paper left. A pattern emerged. Humanity's forgotten empire had not vanished by accident. It had chosen. At the end of a war against something the echoes simply called the silence, to scatter, to become less. Because surviving as a fist meant becoming the thing they had fought. The fleet was the penance and the promise. Stay sleeping unless a descendant could answer the hard question. Why wake now? Rios asked in a quiet moment when the ship felt less like a tomb and more like a house preparing for company. Trigger conditions met. Node 9 pulsed. 3 signs, a lie hardened into law, a frontier closed by decree, a child asking if the stars belong to someone else. It paused. Also, we are lonely. Rios laughed despite himself. The sound echoed in a room where once 100 officers had planned how to kill politely. Out the forward ports, more derelicts glowed awake, like lighthouses answering a storm. That was when the first modern patrol blundered in. The Vesh Triarchate cutter Sable Crown entered the perimeter on silent running, cloak shivering to keep up with harmonics it didn't recognize. Its captain imagined prize money and a statue in some cold plaza. The Relic fleet imagined nothing at all. A point defense system, older than his grandmother's gods, tagged the cutter's wake and placed a pillow of directed inertia in its path. The ship stopped without decelerating. The crew didn't die, they just learned that sometimes physics isn't a democracy. Node 9 dimmed as if tired. We warned. Then, like a sigh, they will send more. And they did. There is theater to power, and the fleet understood stagecraft the way a conductor understands silence. On the third day, a dozen Relic ships shifted from mausoleum geometry into battle array, not facing the intruders but facing Earth, as if asking permission. The flagship, if that word can be used for a vessel whose spine carried cities, unfurled heat blooms like lanterns. Across every human channel an emblem burned, an open hand overlaying a shield. Under it, a sentence, "We remember who we were so we can decide who to be." Diplomats pleaded for time. The hegemony leaked evidence that the fleet ran on sacrificial reactors that required living pilots, a crude lie that said more about the hegemony than the fleet. The Choir Republic proposed a hymn of truce built on non-interference and mutual inspection, which is politics in the key of C. And on talk shows from Kansas City to Ceres, callers argued about legacies and taxes because civilization is mostly meetings about what the past owes the future. None of it stopped the second intrusion. This time, 3 triarchate cruisers with fighter screens brushed the perimeter and opened their holds to disgorge boarding torpedoes. They were professionals. They came to take, not to die. The fleet responded with reluctance and precision. A fine haze drifted out from the tetrahedral core, invisible until it wasn't, caught by sunlight like dust in a church. Where the haze touched armor, it bloomed vines of frost that weren't cold but old, self-assembling interdiction filaments that braided themselves around weapons and whispered sleep. Torpedoes lost guidance and tumbled like drunks. Fighters sagged into safe vectors as if led by a stern ant. The cruisers kept coming. Someone on their bridge finally shouted the ancient words, "All aggressors," right over every mistake. Too late to turn back. The fleet changed key. Guns that had slept for eras opened like eyes, light crossed distances as if distance were a rumor. One cruiser's bow dissolved into steam. Another found itself translated a dozen kilometers starboard without permission. The third surrendered, explicit in 6 languages. Rios watched from the Sutter's mill, jaw tight. "They're holding back." Morgan nodded. War had a taste, iron and old pennies, and it wasn't quite on her tongue. "They're drawing a line. Let's see if anyone reads." After Custodian Node 9 allowed a question it had deferred. Command authority contested. Translation: the fleet could act on its own but preferred not to. Intent requires consent. Translation: it wanted a mandate from the people it called descendants, not from a council terrified of elections. "Are you alive?" Morgan asked. It felt juvenile and necessary. "We are choirs," Node 9 said gently, "not single throats. Memory braided to decision. We recall votes held during bombardment, oaths sworn on ration wafers, and the smell of rain on ship's skin after a dust landing. If that is life, we are it. If it is not, we want it anyway." On the 4th day, a human child in Nairobi recorded a message with a cracked tablet. "Do the stars belong to someone else?" It was 6 seconds long and traveled farther than any fleet. The Relic insignia flashed once across the sky over East Africa, a meteor, people said, until satellite footage showed a deliberate arc. The fleet had heard. It was answering with theater again and tenderness. Spies came. Saboteurs tried. A hegemony cell smuggled a virus through a maintenance umbilical disguised as a hymn. Node 9 read the rhyme, translated it into an apology, and returned it unsigned. "We are not a throne," the reply said. "We are a mirror. If you lean in, you will see yourselves." The cell burned its own safe house to hide embarrassment. That night, Earth's councils held a vote. Not the final decision the fleet wanted. That would take time. But a first principle. No first strikes. No secret seizures. Engage as neighbors, not subjects. The measure passed by a margin that left pundits with nothing to eat but their scripts. The next morning, a triarchate admiral who had sung Conquest all her life asked for parley. Admiral Sail Vara arrived under a white flag that wasn't white but a fractal pattern recognized as truce by 100 species. Her escort stopped respectfully beyond the line where physics went soft. She came aboard Aegis of Dawn, the flagship's name offered at last, with the fatigue of a realist who has met a better plan. Vara's first words were not flattery. "If you intend to rule, do it cleanly. If you intend otherwise, say it plainly." Custodian Node 9 voice filled the chamber like an organ note. "We do not intend to rule." A pause. "We intend to remember." Vara studied the human delegation. Rios in uniform, Morgan in a flight jacket patched with museum badges, a dozen representatives from nations who had learned to disagree without knives. Remembering breeds empire as surely as hunger breeds thieves, she said. The galaxy is a marketplace of stories. The loudest story wins. Then let's not shout, Morgan said. Let's build hospitals. The Admiral almost smiled. You intend mercy as strategy. Mercy as infrastructure, Rios answered. Ports, clinics, arbitration nodes, teach frontier towns how not to get shaken down. You want stability. Here's the American heresy. Security isn't soldiers on every corner, it's courts that work. Vara inclined her head. The Triarchate valued strength. It respected anyone who defined strength without blushing. And the weapons? She asked, glancing at the walls where gun ports slept like eyes. You cannot pretend the galaxy will suddenly become polite. Politeness is not the plan, Node 9 said. Civility with teeth is. Screens brightened, showing schematics labeled in a mixture of old fleet script and modern design. The Relic ships would not expand. They would mentor. The plan proposed custodian compacts, joint crews, human and alien, sworn to limited charters, convoy defense, pirate interdiction, disaster relief, with authority reviewed by public councils and renegotiated annually. The fleet would loan power the way a library loans books, which is to say with due dates and fines. Empires across the map scrambled to adapt. The hegemony offered a coalition, their terms our ships, which died on the floor in a pile of gold. The choir proposed a grand harmony, layered treaties building from local compacts. The Triarchate hedged, as strategists do, a formal non-aggression pact signed alongside an intelligence directive labeled contingency if humans become gods. Not everyone wanted a future with committees. The Black Heralds, a cult that worshipped the silence by different names, attempted a martyr strike on Aegis of Dawn with an antimatter seed hidden inside a pilgrim's reliquary. They were intercepted by a dock worker named Luz Delgado who noticed that the reliquary had never been touched by human hands. The patina was wrong. Delgado pulled the alarm, tackled a saint, broke her wrist, and saved 1,000 strangers. That night, Node 9 etched her name into a corridor beside a frieze of a long-ago mechanic who had once held a damaged bulkhead in place with his back while evacuees ran past. Heroes, the caption read in 2 scripts, are infrastructure too. Markets calmed. Pirate kings did not. A coalition of 5 raider clans raided an aid convoy, betting that the fleet would blink. Rios rode shotgun on the response. They did not blink. Guns sang in disciplined triads, raider hulls folded like paper boats in a storm. 1 clan sued for terms and received them. 2 tried to flee and did not. The last 2 chose the black between stars and were left to learn hunger's gospel. The message was not cruelty, it was choreography. The galaxy learned the steps. In the lull, Morgan and Rios returned to Earth for hearings that sounded like sermons. Citizens asked if they were building an empire by accident. Veterans asked if the fleet would erase the sacrifices of the small wars they'd fought to keep humans honest. A biology teacher from Tulsa asked whether students would still learn poetry. More than ever, Morgan said. If we carry power without beauty, we'll turn into the thing the echoes fought. The hearing ended with a vote to ratify the first custodian compacts. Node 9 relayed the result to the fleet with something like pride. Mandate acknowledged, boundaries accepted. A new emblem, an open hand over a compass, joined the old shield on every hull. At sunset in Nairobi, the child with the cracked tablet pointed her camera at the sky again. "Do the stars belong to someone else?" she asked. The answer came from orbit, spoken in a voice that was many voices. No, they belong to whoever tends them. Come help. The balance had shifted, not toward a throne, but toward a table where seats were being built as fast as hands could work. And in the quiet that followed, the fleet listened, to petitions, to fears, to songs. In the dark behind the listening, something older than hate stirred and turned its face toward the noise of living things. The choir republic of Ilion prized Concord the way miners prize air. Their fleets flew in phalanxes tuned to a common pitch. Their councils voted in rooms designed so no voice could create an echo. Harmony was safety. Harmony was law. But harmony is brittle when a single question keeps vibrating against it. If truth requires silence, is it truth at all? The crack came from a patrol carrier named Shard among many, whose captain watched the Nairobi child's message twice and did not sleep. She began to answer routine orders slower than doctrine allowed, half a beat late, then a beat and a prayer. The delay looked like fatigue on paper. In practice, it was treason disguised as doubt. Her whisper ran along encrypted channels designed to carry hymns. What if loudness is not strength? What if mercy is? Static leaked into the choir's songs. Gunners left their sights a hair off true. Supply ships lost coordinates to checkpoints notorious for graft. Engineers replaced a line of code that forced emergency override with another that required a human's name. The Republic did not notice at first, because a choir is expert at ignoring soloists. Morgan noticed. She and Rios watched the telemetry in Sutter's Mill's dim mission room, the ship's old bones creaking like a front porch in weather. Hesitation is data, she said, and data is a map. The question is whether we walk it. Walking this map means daring them to call it a rebellion, Rios said. Then we don't give them a rebellion, we give them a choice. The Relic fleet shifted tactics. Instead of daring the choir to fight, it landed help where doctrine had left neglect. A Relic frigate escorted watermakers to a desert moon where the governor liked to ration hope. Clinics unfolded like white flowers in orbit over a factory world whose workers had been singing through coughs for years. Old ships that could have cast shadows chose to cast shade. On the ground, something older than law stirred, the simple arithmetic of kindness. A baker etched the fleet's open-hand emblem in flour on his shop window. A teacher paused a hymn mid-phrase to play a recording of Luz Delgado, the dock worker who had tackled a bomb with nothing but stubbornness and bone. Children started asking why their lessons never mentioned humans saving anyone but themselves. The choir council tried counter-theater. Broadcasts showed human battleships as monsters with cathedral spines, their guns chanting conquest. But the counter-programming arrived the same day humanitarian convoys did. One image was myth, the other was medicine. The myth lost. Desperation breeds bargains with worse futures. A faction inside the council opened channels to the Black Heralds, the old cult that preached safety and surrender. The heralds promised tools, not hymns. Reliquaries that masked explosives as piety, signal ciphers that survived interdiction haze, prayers sharpened into knives. The faction believed they were negotiating with zealots they could dismiss later. Zealots do not understand later. Node 9 read the eddies and did not blink. Echo pattern anomaly detected. Its voice was calm as a weather report that mentions a nameable storm. Recommendation: enlarge the table. So the fleet did the least imperial thing a force can do. It invited the choir's doubters to a convention. Dock workers, quartermasters, junior officers with the kind of eyes that see, farmers whose tractors sang out of tune, all were ferried to a neutral station ringed by Relic corvettes at polite distance. No one was asked to defect. Everyone was asked to argue. They did. About wages and ritual, about the cost of harmony, about whether singing louder ever saved a single child. At the convention's end, Shard among many's captain walked to a console and placed her palm on a scanner that did not belong to her flag. "I still love my people," she said into 50 feeds. "I am simply unwilling to lie to them." She requested sanctuary. Hundreds followed, not because the fleet was stronger, but because it was listening. Empires do not die of heart attacks, they die of clots of disbelief. The first clot had formed. The choir called it apostasy. In markets and mess halls, it had a simpler name, honesty with a way out. The Black Heralds kept no capitals. Their scripture fit on scars. Where others saw in the fleet a chance to rebuild, the heralds saw betrayal of a vow. Go quiet, stay scattered, never draw the thing that eats the loud. They believed the ancient silence was not a metaphor but a habit of the universe like gravity or grief. Light a beacon, you feed it. Luthra's rim colonies trusted beacons. They lifted farms out of rust with orbital mirrors and sent lullabies to children born under twin suns. At dawn on the third day of the harvest, an array went white and stayed white. The sun harvester ruptured, a careless god swinging a lantern through a barn. 2 million died without learning the name of the knife. The herald's message followed, better ashes than empire. They meant the humankind, but everyone could smell the hatred was portable. Rios argued for retaliation sharp enough to break teeth. Not to punish, he told the council, to deter. Morgan shook her head. Deterrence built from grief becomes a monument to fear. The heralds want us furious. Let's be stubborn instead. Node 9 agreed with infuriating patience. Theater of repair. Build louder than they break. The phrase sounded like poetry until you watched it done. Relic constructors unfurled spindles that printed triage wards into the vacuum, each a white petal glowing with its own breath. Habs rose on the cooling plane with a grace that made engineers cry. The fleet's interdiction haze fell like a veil across the system. Anything faster than a moth slept where it touched. Aid packets carried not just food but dignity. Portable courts, voting kits, radio stations you could assemble with clean hands, and a manual written in honest sentences. The heralds had tried to teach helplessness. The fleet taught that competence is a kind of hope. The cult struck again, uglier, smaller. A nanite bloom disguised as snow at a refugee dock, a choir of suicide drones dressed as pilgrims, a saint whose reliquary hummed at the wrong frequency. A longshore crewwoman named Juno Agu darted a hand into the reliquary and came away burned, holding a core that never detonated because she refused to let go. Node 9 etched Agu into the Aegis's corridor wall beside Delgado, each name a brick in a story that said everyday courage is not an accident. It is policy. Even with the repairs, fear spread, the quiet, pragmatic kind that lowers voices in bars. Node 9 scans returned whispers from far and faint, resonance matching ancient silence harmonics, confidence low but rising. Words like resonance and harmonics make terror sound like math. The meaning was simpler, something old might be listening. Rio stood watch in the Sutter's Mills viewport and let the fear in, not to drown but to learn its taste. If this is bait, he said, we've already bitten. Morgan joined him, a paper cup of ship coffee warming her palms. If we're bait, then we choose the ocean we swim. The heralds think survival is hiding. Our answer has to be living so well that hiding looks like another form of dying. They did one thing the heralds did not expect. They invited a captured acolyte to speak on public channels with a promise that she would be answered, not erased. The girl, no older than 19, eyes bright with the certainty of saved people, quoted verses about entropy's mercy. Morgan did not debate physics. She told the story of a bomb stopped by a dock worker, a reliquary cooled by stubborn hands, wheat replanted on soil still warm from fire. You think the silence frees you from choosing, Morgan said gently. But choosing not to choose is a choice. The feed ended. Somewhere, recruitment stalled. Zeal meets its first crack not when it is crushed, but when it is heard and found unconvincing. Node 9 dimmed the lights and spoke like weather again. Edge readings persist. Prepare for a question greater than war. Power unmeasured becomes superstition. The conclave of Meridian convened to measure. Triarch strategists arrived in austere uniforms that made compromise look like treason. Hegemony oligarchs came draped in fabrics that whispered when they schemed. Choir delegates came in plain robes, some with hymn pins turned upside down. Pirates came because pirates always do when there are rules to bend. Aegis of Dawn hung above the chamber like a cathedral undecided about faith. Humanity took a single table and filled it with people who looked exactly like a species that argues at breakfast and still shares lunch. Rios, pressed into a suit he hated. Morgan in a jacket with museum patches and oil smudges. Luz Delgado, given a seat and a microphone and instructions to say exactly what she believed. The The question was not couched in legal poetry. It sat in the center of the hall like a stone. What is the purpose of the Relic fleet now that it breathes? Rio spoke first. He did not thunder, he counted. Convoys escorted, raids deterred, ports where pirates now pay docking fees and taxes. I can hand you a spreadsheet of lives not ended. He tapped the stone. But numbers hide a danger. The fleet can do more than anyone should be allowed to do. The only safety is to decide what it may never do. Morgan followed. Empires mistake memory for permission. We are not resurrecting a throne, we are repairing a promise. She told the story of the echoes, votes held while bombardment rattled the plates, oaths sworn on ration wafers when paper ran out. Our ancestors built this power and then denied themselves its comfort. The echo we honor is not conquest, it is restraint. The room demanded spectacle. Node 9 obliged with the opposite, transparency. It projected, for all to read the fleet's limitations as code, not poetry. No first strikes. No secret prisons, no property seizures without councils that include the governed, annual mandates subject to revocation by public vote. Lawyers tried to find back doors. They found chimes that rang when they touched the guardrails. An oligarch sneered. All this humility, and still your guns can swat a cruiser like a moth. Luz Delgado leaned into the mic. I've seen what power does when nobody tells it no, she said, voice steady as a dock line. It gets dumb. It forgets the difference between can and should. We're not pretending we're saints. We're riding down the leash and handing you the rope. The chamber shifted, not toward love. Love is scarce at scale, but toward respect. Then the vote came, but not only from states. Node 9 opened a public band and let the galaxy speak like a town hall unmuted. A farmer on a choir moon voted for clinics over dreadnoughts. A pirate queen admitted that mercy had cost her recruits and saved her life twice. The Nairobi child appeared again, awkward and clear. Don't be kings, be gardeners. The tally tipped, purpose defined. The fleet would serve as scaffold, not sword, custodian, not crown. The emblem on every hull shifted, the open hand now cradling a small seed whose leaves were 7 languages worth of the word future. Admiral Salvara stood when it was done. Very well, she said. We will plan for the day you fail your own creed. Until then, we will work with you to make failure unlikely. It was the closest thing to blessing the Triarchate had. Back aboard Aegis, Node 9 repeated the mandate in a tone that sounded like relief. Consent received. Restraint codified. Choirs rejoice. The cheer that went up across ports and stations had a new timbre, not the hysteria of rescued people, but the measured happiness of a neighborhood getting its first reliable court. Outside, instruments still heard the faint wrongness at the edge. Decisions cannot banish storms. They can only decide what will be built under them. A month after the conclave, a convoy threaded Hestia Gap under custodian escort. Ore barges, hospital tenders, and a school ship painted the green of first leaves. Pirates watched from safe distance and complained that honesty was ruining margins. The Gap had been a place where raiders taught lessons in scarcity. Now the only lesson was scheduling. On a mining moon called Violin, a new courthouse opened inside a repurposed ore silo. The judge wore a pressure collar and quoted not law alone, but charter promises that had started traveling with fleet convoys like seed packets. When a cartel lieutenant tried to bribe the clerk pointed to the camera and smiled an apology that felt like a revolution. Training academies bloomed in bays that once launched bombers. Human instructors taught alien cadets how to fix sealants with chewing gum and faith. Alien mentors taught human ensigns how to sing to metal until welds held. Children toured the frieze corridor and argued about who qualified as a hero, which is the point of such corridors. The Black Heralds did not vanish. They learned to whisper in new keys, folding grief into recruitment and selling certainty like sugar. Now and then they drew blood. A medical shuttle vented atmosphere over a blue world and fell in silent lights. Names were added to walls. Grief did what grief does. It asked for vengeance and then, shamed by its own appetite, asked for something better. Edge readings persisted. Node 9 published them the way weather stations publish hurricane maps, without drama, without denial. Resonance stable, amplitude low, origin indeterminate. Scientists argued, artifact of ancient wars or the first breath of the old eater. Preachers argued different words for the same fear. Markets, trained dogs that they are, pretended not to hear and bought copper. At dusk on Earth, the child who had started it, older now, hair braided, smile unchanged, stood on a school roof with a group of classmates and a teacher who remembered how to look up. They watched Aegis of Dawn burn like a second star and tried to imagine living in a century where that sight felt ordinary. The child filmed a short message on a not-cracked tablet. "We're planting a garden. If something comes to eat it, we will not stop planting." The clip played on stations where dockhands drank after shift and in study halls where cadets learned orbital mechanics beside poems. It played on triarch ships where Admiral Vara pretended not to smile and on choir worlds where Shard among many's name had become a verb meaning to hesitate bravely. It even played briefly in a herald's cell where one recruit frowned at the part where the children laughed. Rios watched from the Sutter's mill, tired in the way command makes a person, alert and lonely. "Think the silence listens to this?" he asked. Morgan answered without looking away from the stars. "I hope it does. If it's a mind, maybe we can make it curious. If it's a habit of the universe, maybe we can teach it ours." She tapped the glass. "We have a better story than fear. That's not arrogance, it's homework." The fleet prepared, not by sharpening every blade, though they stayed sharp, but by rehearsing compassion until it looked like instinct. They practiced evacuations with species that breathed water and species that argued in math. They wrote children's books about oaths and airlocks. They revised their own limits, added footnotes where temptation might slip through. They made failure legible so that when it came, as it always does, repair would be possible. And somewhere beyond charted lanes, instruments hiccuped, not alarm but acknowledgement. The resonance dipped and steadied as if a hand withdrew from a door it had been testing. Maybe the silence had decided the noise was not prey. Maybe it had paused to listen. Maybe the universe had simply remembered that it is wide enough to hold both quiet and choir. Under strange suns, gardens took root, unruly, demanding, alive. The Relic fleet kept station above them like old oaks over a new park, not to cast fear, but to give shade and boundaries. On Aegis of Dawn, beneath the names cut into steel, a fresh line of script appeared in 2 alphabets and 7 dialects. "We do not own the future. We hold the door while it walks in." They did not declare an era, they declared a practice. On a morning the color of tarnished silver over Nairobi, a small crowd gathered beneath a mural of the open hand cradling a seed. Rios wore a jacket he'd finally grown comfortable in. Morgan came with grease on her cuff and a speech she hadn't written down. Luz Delgado stood shyly at the edge until Node 9 insisted, through a tinny speaker mounted on a streetlight, that she take the front row. Above, Aegis of Dawn crossed the sky as a thin white scar that comforted more than it threatened. They called it the Custodian Charter Day, but the ceremony was built from smaller nouns: bench, ballot, clinic, bridge. The charter did not promise triumph. It promised habit, to publish power's limits, to renew consent in public, to teach every child which lever shuts an airlock and which lever shuts a voice, and why the second must be harder to reach. The child with the cracked tablet, new screen, same smile, took the stage last. She was taller now, the camera no longer shook in her hands. "We asked if the stars belong to someone else," she said, glancing up as if the sky might answer out loud. "They don't. They belong to whoever tends them, so we'll tend them together." She set a little sapling into a square of soil carried from a dozen worlds, choir loam, triarch grit, Luthra ash cooled and blessed by stubborn gardeners. In that mingled dirt, a green thing accepted its first drink. Elsewhere, Admiral Sail Vara signed a memo that would never trend. It archived a contingency labeled "If humans become kings" and replaced it with another, "If humans forget." Her attaché asked what forgetting entailed. Vara said, "When they start winning arguments faster than they fix broken doors." On Violin's new courthouse steps, a pirate queen, 3 amnesties into a cleaner life, taught apprentices how to read invoices that no longer hid shackles in the fine print. In a bay once dedicated to bombers, a class of cadets learned 2 kinds of countdown, the one that launches a ship and the one that keeps a patient breathing until help arrives. Their exam asked them to choose correctly in noise and hurry. Most passed. The failures were not discarded. They were tutored because the charter said excellence is a public work. The Black Heralds did not evaporate. Zeal seldom does. But they lost the argument by inches. A defector returned a reliquary to Aegis and confessed she had carried its hum like a lullaby. Node 9 placed the object in an archive labeled Warnings Kept Honest by Sunlight and with permission recorded her story beside it. "You listened," she said, bewildered, "even when I was wrong." Node 9 answered, "Listening is armor." At the galaxy's ragged edge, instruments kept hearing almost music, a resonance that flirted with pattern and then fell back into wind. Reports went out without drama, signed by scientists whose names would never appear on banners. The graphs were boring on purpose. If the old eater came, it would meet a civilization trained to coordinate without a whip and to resist without becoming the thing it hated. Rios retired from the Sutter's mill and failed at it. He taught watch standing to cadets who arrived on time and learned to be early. When they asked about fear, he said you keep it like a coin in your pocket. Remember it's there, don't spend it all in one place. When they asked about bravery, he pointed to a corridor on Aegis where names, Delgado Agu, 100 more, turned steel into scripture. Bravery isn't a mood, he told them. It's a policy you pre-commit to. Morgan kept moving, as historians do when the present keeps producing better sources. She wrote field manuals that read like storybooks and storybooks that doubled as field manuals. In a footnote that cadets underlined in 3 colors, she offered the only definition of human the fleet ever adopted. We are the animal that misuses fire, and then learns to build kitchens, lighthouses, and laws. A year to the day after Charter Day, the Nairobi sapling's roots found the seam where soils met and did not care. In the same hour, a school ship put down on a violet world where the wind sang in fifths. Its classrooms unfolded like origami into a plaza. Children from 5 species argued cheerfully over whose turn it was to read the plaque they bolted to the first door. We do not own the future. We hold the door while IT walks in. Above that plaza, Aegis of Dawn coasted in the thin light, not as a throne but as shade. Node 9 lowered the external mics and listened to laughter spiking the spectrum like flares. It cross-referenced those harmonics with the oldest echoes, voices recorded during bombardments, lullabies hummed in shelters, oaths spoken with crumbs of ration wafer on tongues, and found the same frequencies, stronger now, cleaner. Choirs align, it wrote in a log no one would read, and allowed itself the closest thing it knew to joy. That night beneath a sky busy with lawful traffic, the child, no longer quite a child, climbed the school's observation ladder with a friend and a thermos of sweet tea. "Do you think the silence understands any of this?" the friend asked. "I don't know," she said. "I hope it listens. If it's a mind, maybe it grows curious. If it's a law, maybe it learns what we do with laws." She sipped and smiled. "We don't worship them, we write around them." Far out, on the edge where maps turned honest and said here be cold, the long hum shifted by the width of a breath and steadied. Maybe a hand withdrew from a latch. Maybe the wind changed direction. Maybe nothing at all happened except that a civilization stopped waiting to be eaten and got on with the work. Gardens under strange suns do not announce themselves as epoch. They ask for water and for weeding and for someone to come back tomorrow. The human relic fleet kept its orbit and its promise, old hulls wearing new paint, gunports sleeping under banners that meant not yet and not like that. And when dawn slid its silver knife along Nairobi's horizon, the mural's seedling glowed as if the wall itself were thin. Practice, not prophecy. Habit, not heroics. A door held, and on the other side, footsteps multiplied.